start the record. Okay, great. So welcome to another WAVEx webinar. And WAVE, for those of you who are not from Washington State, it stands for Washington Advancements in Viticulture and Enology. And we use this label to brand all of our research education. So we have a WAVE newsletter that's all about research. We do in-person WAVE seminars. We do WAVE webinars. We typically call the WAVE webinars WAVEx because they're short and condensed in just one topic. So today, we don't have spotted lanternfly in Washington State, but we don't want it. And so we have asked Dr. Michela Centinari to share what she's learned. Michelle Moyer is going to introduce her in just a moment. And it was actually, Michelle heard her give a talk and said, wow, our people really need to hear this. A reminder, we have one pesticide credit approved for both Washington and Oregon Department of Ag. And so at the end, we will allow time for question and answers. So put that in the Q&A, not the chat, but the Q&A. And to get your pesticide credit in midterm of midway into the webinar, Michela is going to give a code word. Then that code word at the very end of the webinar, you need to put your name, your registration number, and the code word into the chat. And we will capture all of that, and then I will file it to the appropriate departments. And just as a reminder, you got to follow the rules because often Washington and Oregon sit in on these webinars and make sure we follow things. So with that, I am going to stop sharing. And Michelle.
Perfect. So Michela can queue up her talk while I'm introducing her. So as Melissa mentioned, I saw Dr. Centinari give a fantastic spotted lanternfly presentation at a grape meeting this summer. And I was like, we need to hear this in Washington because it's one of the few chats we've had, or the few talks I've been able to listen to that was actually grape specific. So as a quick overview, Dr. Centinari is currently an associate professor of viticulture at Penn State. But she received her bachelor's in horticulture and PhD in viticulture from the University of Bologna. So you might be able to tell from her accent that she's Italian. Sorry, Michela, I just had to tease her. But Michela and I actually first met when she was doing a postdoc at Cornell University, and I won't say when, so we don't have to talk about timelines on that, but that's where we first met, was at Cornell. Michela does a lot of work on basic grape production and sustainable grape management, and her specialty is how those practices influence grapevine physiology. In addition, she does a lot of work on grapevine stress response, especially to cold and frost, and grapevine root development as well. When she's not doing research, Michela is heavily engaged in student mentoring. I believe her graduate student this year won the ASV President's Award in viticulture. Is that correct, Michela? Yep. And she's very, very heavily involved in the American Society for Enology and Viticulture Eastern Section, and then the national organization as well, both serving as on the board of directors for the Eastern Section and a bunch of committees. I know I ask her to be on committees all the time for AACV National. So more recently, she and I were just chatting about this, whether she likes it or not. She is the grape expert when it comes to spotted lanternfly and its impacts on grape production here in the United States. And with that, we'll let Michela share her expertise with us. So thank you, Michela, for joining us today.
Wow. Thanks, Michelle, for the great introduction. Yes, I guess I'm officially the grape expert for lanternfly. So thanks everyone for attending the webinar, and it's really my pleasure to be here and share some of our work, but mostly our experience and the grape grower experience dealing with these invasive pests, which unfortunately for us here in the East Coast has been a really concerning pest for our grape growers and overall the wine industry. And I really hope you don't have to deal with that in the future. So to get started, I just want to very briefly go over the current distribution of lanternfly in the East Coast. Just to give you a better idea on how quickly the lanternfly has spread in the East Coast, not just in Pennsylvania, but also in surrounding states, and why also is such a successful invasive species. So maybe you've seen this map or a similar version of this map, but every shape of this blue county, they represent a county where spotted lanternfly is now present. Okay, this map is was updated about a month ago, November 9th. And mostly I want to draw your attention to this area of this county down here in red, highlighted in red. So that is Berks County in PA, in Southeast PA. And that is where the lanternfly was first discovered in the United States in 2014, so almost 10 years ago. So we started to see SLF, spotted lanternfly, in vineyards about 3 years later. So it took about 3 years to establish in vineyard. I'm talking about large population in vineyards. And then as the lanternfly has spread to surrounding counties, you can see now most of PA is under quarantine, but also in other states, we have seen more and more vineyard with pretty large infestation of this pest. And right now we have lanternfly present in 13 additional states. So definitely, despite quarantine effort, lanternfly has spread quickly, and there are several reasons why. One is that definitely, I can assure you, it's very hard to stop human-mediated dispersal via transportation. It's been very hard. But also another reason is because the lanternfly, like every other invasive species, doesn't have natural predators. And this is what happened here in PA. We went from zero lanternfly to huge amount in just a few years because we didn't have any natural predators. And another reason why we have seen this, quick spread of this insect is because the lanternfly can feed on many, many different plants. They can feed on over 100 different plant species, but they do have some favorite hosts. And here, at least in our region, here in the East Coast, they do prefer host number one is the tree of heaven, but also the other favorite hosts are grapevines. And I'm talking about both wild grapevines and cultivated, can be vinifera, hybrids, and even native grapes. They love grapevines. So this video hopefully will play well. This basically, I guess, can give you a better idea of what I mean by large population, right? Sometimes we see in area with high infestation of lanternfly, probably these are thousands of lanternfly on a single tree of heaven. Yeah, it's pretty gross. And also in vineyards, we see there's a trunk of a grapevine completely covered by adult lanternfly. This is one of the first vineyards that we visited back in 2017 with high infestation of lanternflies. So as you can imagine, when growers, so this insect infesting their vines, they have a lot of questions. It's going to damage my plants. Should I spray? What should I spray? How can I control this insect? Unfortunately, at that time, we didn't have many or any answers because despite the lanternfly had been already an invasive species in another few countries in Asia, like in Japan and South Korea, really we had very little information on what damage they can cause to what crops and how to manage that. So we really had to start from zero, and it was a really steep learning curve for us, for the grape growers, and definitely by now, I mean, almost 10 years later, grape growers have a much better grasp on how to manage this insect, but still it's pretty challenging to manage. And I will, hopefully throughout the presentation, you can have a better understanding why it can be challenging to manage in vineyard, and specifically the adult lanternflies. So on a positive note, lanternfly, at least here, based on our environment, in our region, we have not heard of any reports of lanternfly damaging orchards. So they can feed on apple or other tree fruit. As I think it's pretty obvious from this photo. Here we have probably hundreds of lanternfly feeding on an apple trees, but they typically don't stay there long. So they just feed for a short term, maybe 1-2 days, and then they move on to another crop. But it's a very different situation for grapes. What happens is when, typically here you can see more adult lanternflies, what happens is that they come into the vineyard from the surrounding landscaping, and then they stay in the vineyard. They don't move on to other crops. They really like grapes, and they can stay there, until basically the fall, until the frost basically is going to kill them in the fall. And here again, another picture where you can see spotted lanternfly. Those are feeding on the stem of the grapes. Later on, during the fall, we see them feeding on the cordon, and then they go to the trunk. So they don't feed on the leaves, they don't feed on the fruit, but mostly on the stem, cordons, and trunks. So as the lanternfly started to infest more and more vineyard, we definitely heard lots of grape grower reporting damage. Mostly what they reported was like a reduction in yield, overall fruit quality, which is pretty vague, but overall reduction in quality, and the overall decline in vine health. And in some cases, even vine death after very heavy infestation density. And this doesn't happen like overnight, right? Sometimes it take a few years, but we definitely, heard a lot of reports of damage. So we are often asked, what is the economic impact of this pest on your wine industry? Can you give us a number? And definitely it's very hard, like it's very challenging to determine the economic impact of a pest, and it depends on many different factors, which we'll highlight throughout the presentation. And another reason why it's hard to determine the impact, the damage, is because the lanternflies, they are phloem feeding insect. As I mentioned, they feed on the phloem of the stem, so they don't feed directly on the fruit, or they don't damage directly the fruit. So you don't have damaged fruit that you have maybe with other pests. So it can be harder, to quantify the damage, and it takes longer for the damage to show up. Can be, over the years. And I want just to show you another video, kind of another scary video showing, again, adult lanternfly feeding on the stem of the vines. So again, they don't feed on the fruit, they feed on the stem, and as they feed, they ingest a large amount of sap, and they release, I can see probably here in the center, they release the excess water and sugar through this, and this excess water and sugar is called honeydew, and it's going to build up on the leaves around the feeding points. Okay, and this is a picture that one of our students took a few years ago in one of a vineyard with high infestation of lanternfly. You can see here more honeydew dripping from the lanternflies. So while it may be hard to define, the economic damage on the grapevines, again, because it depends on many factors, it's been a little easier to quantify the increase in management costs. Because right now, through chemical application, for natural predators or can, control the population. We have seen some results, but right now, not to a point that these other biological control can reduce population to an acceptable level. So the only way grape growers have to control population through insecticide application. We went from growing, maybe one insecticide per year for the lanternflies to spray, 6 times more, or even insecticide than in the past. So it's crazy, and of course related to this increased use of insecticide in vineyards. Also, we asked our grape growers, that was spring 2022, so 2 years ago, what they thought about the lantern, specifically if they consider the lanternfly a threat for grape production in their states. And these are growers from Pennsylvania, but also New Jersey and Maryland. And so basically the red bars, okay, this show growers that they consider the lanternfly a threat within the next 5 years. And you can see about 80% of them, they do consider a significant threat to their state, in their state. We have some of them that are in the site. So the survey included growers, lanternfly in their vineyard Okay, so those one decided were mostly growers that didn't lanternfly there yet. Next, I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about population of lanternfly dynamics within the vineyard. Okay, what we have region in PA, and probably you have seen figure in the past and showing basically the life of the lanternfly. And I just want to mention that in our region here in PA, they can only have one generation there, going from egg masses to adults. I want to highlight that we can find stage in vineyards from egg mass to, and they can also come entire life cycle on grapevines. Okay, host. And I have other, very nice picture in egg masses installed of on grapevine. So it's one. First, I want to go over the egg mass. We typically see them starting in this early fall, late fall, when the adult lanternfly, they lay egg masses on the trunk of the vines. They can lay them on the cordons. They really like to lay eggs on the posts. You can see here there are, I get over 100 egg masses on a single wooden post or even metal post. They don't care basically every. So thought the first approach when we saw this, these egg masses in mechanically. So what growers did at the beginning were, scrapping the egg masses during the winter vines. But I imagine this is a super labor intensive. If you have maybe, it's okay, but when you have, thousands of vines and thousands of egg masses, it's sometimes not feasible. So there have been some trials looking at the efficacy of several chemical products to target specifically the eggs, to kill eggs. But these products have been, the outcomes has been variable. Most of our growers don't actually use ovicides, and they don't target eggs. What they do, they typically wait until eggs hatch, and they get to control nymphs population. More effective in controlling lanternfly population. Also, one reason because maybe you're able to remove all egg masses in your or kill them through the use of herbicides, but they have trees like this one here on your right, all around your bean with thousands, hundreds of egg masses. So really, you don't really solve them. They have these eggs hatching in the spring, and then you have nymphs, in the nurse. So the growers have, moved away from egg masses, and now what they do, they wait till eggs hatch, and then they target the nymphs. Those are picture of the 4 instars of the lanternfly nymphs, and here we see them in the vineyard starting in end of April, May, and they typically stay there until midsummer. You can see here also other pictures showing our little nymphs feeding on the stem of the grapevines. They really like the green tender shoots, and also they like to hide underneath the leaves. But they don't feed on the leaves. They mostly feed on the stems. So on a positive note, the nymphs are pretty easy to manage. And one of the reasons is because they don't typically ring-fest the vineyard as the adults do. So if if the grower have to control nymphs population, they typically do only once. They only need one insecticide application, no multiple. And also what happened that most growers, so some of our growers, so most of them, they typically wait to spray for nymphs until they have other insects, right, in their vineyard, like grape berry moth or Japanese beetles, which are common pests here in our in the East Coast. And so they do one cover spray that control all of these insects at once. But it's a very different story for adults. Adults are much more challenging to control. And one of the reasons is because typically they show up in the vineyard pretty late. They start to show up in August, but we have peaks the highest number, typically in September, in October. And again, they can stay in the vineyard until the first fall frost are going to kill them. So they stay, they don't move away. And as you can imagine, we are very close to harvest, during harvest. So there are very few products that we can use to kill the insecticide, and specifically products with little or no residual activity. So what happened is that the lanternflies are actually pretty easy to kill with insecticides. There are a few contact insecticide or with little residual activity that can be used. But then what we see reinfestation of the vineyard a few days later from a new population of lanternfly coming from the surrounding area. So they reinfest the vineyards, and then the growers, it has to spray again to control, this new infestation, and so on. And as you can imagine, they're already very busy. They have to harvest the vines. There are labor issues, financial concern related to this, huge increase in insecticide use, but also environmental concern. They typically use broad spectrum insecticides, and growers, have reported increased, some of them, of secondary pests like mealybugs, because these insecticides are also killing the beneficial insects. So we, I showed you some kind of apocalyptic scenario of this, large population of lanternfly vineyards, but also I want to mention that this doesn't happen overnight, right? Typically, we say it takes 2-3 years to build a population. And what I mean is, like, first, we typically see them in the area surrounding a vineyard. You go and scout, for example, wooded area around the vineyard, and you can find them there first, in Tree of Heaven or other trees. Then what happened, typically the second year, you start to see them on the edge of the vineyard, on the perimeter, just a few. And by the third year is when we typically see a large number of these insects in vineyards. Of course, not everywhere, but in area with high infestation. And I just want to show you another video. And this is showing high number. I don't know if it's clear. These are all flying above the vines. These are all lanternflies. And this is a vineyard, I guess. This was year 3 when we start to see lots of them. And after, being in the wooded area first, then they slowly enter the vineyard and establish there. And as you can imagine, also they are kind of an annoying bug, because you're there harvesting, we were there harvesting, and, and they fly all around and they lay on you, they get stuck on the grapes. So there are, additional challenges related to work, dealing with this pest. Okay. Another thing I want to mention, and when I talk about, this high number of lanternfly, like 100 per vine, etc., I typically talk about vines on the edge of the vineyards, because they don't, they don't spread. Since they infest the vineyard from the landscaping around, they typically establish high population within the first 50, 70 feet of the vineyard edge. And I just want to show you another example from, this is a vineyard down here that was infested with lanternfly for a few years, starting around 2018. This is in Southeast PA. And specifically, I want to draw your attention on this square, blue square down here. And that was the vineyard block with the highest infestation. So what happened in this case, the lanternfly were entering the vineyard from this area, this wooded area here, and they were, launching and establishing themselves up here in this corner. And I don't know if it's clear from the photos, but there are missing vines, a bunch of missing vines here on the upper left corner. And that is where they were, the highest population density of this pest. Of course, I don't want, to say, oh, it's the lanternfly that caused vine death, but definitely is where most of the vines were dead, and the grower now had to replace and replant that area. So I would say that right now, based on our experience and working with growers, I would say that all of them, most, but basically all of them, are spraying for adults. And we don't have at this point, unfortunately, we don't have, or we don't know what's the lowest population density that can create an economic damage. So, it's hard for growers to determine when should I start spraying, right? When I have 50 lanternfly or 5 lanternfly on a vine. So it's pretty hard to judge, and unfortunately, because of that, the insecticide use has increased sharply. Of course, in an attempt to be more environmentally friendly, and reduce chemical input, growers are trying to target specific area where lanternfly infestation are highest, the perimeter of the vineyard, and not spray, the whole vineyard block if it's not needed, or just target, if it's feasible, the areas around the vineyard, so to prevent the lanternfly from entering into the vineyard, again, when it's feasible. So again, the lanternfly definitely is not a concern for you right now, but we have a lot of information in our extension website about lanternfly in general and specific for vineyards. So this, for example, is one of our fact sheets where we talk specifically about management strategies for vineyards. So if you would like to have more information, feel free to reach out to me or look online on our Penn State Extension website. We also have a list of insecticides that have been tried and for what stage can be used, what their efficacy rating, and again, there are a few that you can use. There are a few that you can use very close to harvest, but we don't have many other options right now to control the lanternfly. So now, hopefully you're still listening. It's time for to give you the pesticide code word, which is on the slide, is SLF.
So just as a reminder, folks, to keep that, write that down, and we will ask you to put that in the chat box with your name and pesticide license number at the end of the talk, at the end of Michela's talk. So not now, but at the end. So write this down so you remember.
SLF, yes. Okay, so now I can move on. So, okay, after this overview of the lanternfly, and why it's a problem for our wine industry, now I'm switching gears a little bit and talk about one of the major related issue related to this pest in vineyard, which is the sap-feeding damage to the grapevine. If I have time at the end, I can also cover type of more indirect damage that can go to the grapevines due to the production of honeydew, sooty mold, and also in addition to be a nuisance and annoying bugs for the wineries. But I'll start first with the sap-feeding damage and cover some of our work that we have done to better understand how lanternfly is damaging grapevines. So I think by now you had a good understanding that the lanternfly is disrupting the integrated pest management in many vineyards, in affected vineyards here in our region. So my lab mostly has been working on doing research on trying to understand why and how this lanternfly are damaging the grapevines, specifically grapevines, and trying to better understand, why growers are reporting this reduction in yield, fruit quality, etc. And while we're doing that, we hope that better understand, this damage can also help to provide more target management recommendation. Again, by now, right now, growers typically apply insecticide when maybe they see a few lanternfly per vine, but maybe that is not needed. So we need some action threshold, right? We need to tell our growers when is a good time when they should start applying insecticide. So basically, we want to determine, again, this, what is the lowest population density that can trigger an action or that can cause an economic damage. And it takes time. It's not an easy task, but there are many factors affecting that. But I guess we're getting a better understanding of the type of damage and how the vine responds to different population density. So in order to do so, we have been conducting field work in the quarantine area, so mostly in Southeast PA, on several grapevine varieties. We typically use, we do work on our major grape variety, our Cab Franc, Chardonnay. We also have Riesling, and we also use some hybrids like Noiré. A common trend of these studies is that we enclose vines in this netting cage. So each vine basically has its own cage, netting cage, and we do that so we can introduce the insect inside this netting cage. So basically each lanternfly, each grapevine is exposed to a different number of lanternfly. We introduce from very low amount to huge amount, like we go from 0 up to 200 lanternfly per vine. Okay, you will see in the next few slides that I typically standardize the number of lanternfly per shoot, because despite, of course, we try to do shoot thinning and standardize the number of shoots per vine, the number of shoots per vine can change. So we express the number of lanternfly per shoot. But remember, that when I talk about 15 lanternfly per shoot, that is about 200 per vine, so huge amount. So our first work, on lanternfly was specifically done with adult lanternfly. So what you will see today mostly are results from a study done on adult lanternfly. And we typically, at the beginning, we assess what happened when the lanternfly are infesting the vines for 1 year, one single season. Then we were able to expand our work, and now we are looking at also other varieties, but also we are looking at nymphs. So not just adult lanternfly, but also how nymphs can affect grapevines. And we're also looking at the cumulative effect. So what happened when lanternfly are reinfesting the same vine year after year? So these slides show basically summarize, I guess, the main results, better the most consistent trend that we have seen across years, across varieties. This is what we typically see. And basically it's like if lanternfly are not promptly managed, if you leave the lanternfly feed on the vines, they're going definitely to alter or to affect the carbon, the sugar allocation in the plants by the end of the season. What we typically see is a strong reduction, a decrease in starch in the root system at the end of the season. And we know starch is very important sugar, carbohydrates for, storage of sugar, and also it's very important for the following year growth. So our hypothesis that this, depletion of starch is what also is going to affect vines, or how we can explain the vine decline observed from, by the growers over the years. And also we have seen a reduction in soluble sugar, in bricks in the fruit at harvest. So these are, again, some pretty consistent trends that we see when lanternfly are feeding on the vine in large amount. And I don't want to show, lots of graphs, I just have a few to give you an idea of the type of trends that we have seen on our studies. And specifically this one show the starch concentration in the roots after 1 year of lanternfly feeding on the vines. And each of these dots represent one vine which is infested with a different number of lanternflies. So you go from 0 up to very, very high numbers. And as you can see, there is basically a linear decrease in starch. So higher number of lanternfly, less starch. And this decrease, again, is pretty linear. We see a stronger effect when we have very high density, like maybe like 60 or 80 per vine. But still, is happening also with lower density. But this happens when the vines are exposed to lanternfly for an extended amount of time. So definitely it's very important for growers to promptly manage them, right? So they don't let them feed for almost a month. But that, again, is pretty challenging because it's happening during harvest. So it's a very hard time to also apply, insecticide and control lanternfly feeding. Also, we typically don't see an effect of lanternfly on yield on the first year. So the lanternfly typically arrive or start to feed on the vines late in the season. So we don't see any effect on the yield on year one. It is basically what this graph here is showing. Each dot represents a vine, and there is, a scatter plot, and there is no trend. But then what happened, if the lanternfly are coming back on the same vine and keep feeding on the same vine, by year number 2, we start to see again a pretty linear decrease in yield. And these are, pretty recent data that we got this past harvest. And now, of course, we are investigating, the mechanism by which the lanternfly are reducing the yield on the yield component, like berry size, cluster size, etc. But this is happening, and this is an example Chardonnay, but we have seen that also, in Cab Franc, for example. Last, also, I wanted to show you how the lanternfly can affect sugar accumulation in grapes, in the fruit. We don't see any effect on pH or treatable acidity, but definitely there is a reduction in the sugar in the grapes, and this is happening, over time. This figure here shows basically the Brix level the day we introduce lanternfly on the vines. Again, each of these dots represent a vine. And as you can see, there is no trend, right? We go from 16 to 17 Brix. Then if we let the lanternfly feed on the vine for about 11 days, we start to see a pretty weak trend, more lanternfly, lower Brix, but still pretty weak. But if we let the lanternfly feed for 15 days more, so we have now 26 days of lanternfly exposure, we start to see a pretty strong linear trend. We go from 21 Brix, which for us, is good. With Cab Franc, we don't reach much higher, maybe 23. But definitely we have lower Brix in vines exposed to a high number of lanternflies. And this picture hopefully give you a better idea of what I'm talking about. Is different that we see a harvest in terms of not just Brix, sugar content or concentration, but also on the color of the grapes. Again, these are vines exposed to a huge number of lanternfly, adult lanternfly, but you can clearly see that the grapes, didn't ripen as well as the one with no lanternfly, and definitely we saw less anthocyanin and color on these grapes. And we even made wine from these grapes, also from Chardonnay, and now we are analyzing the effect of the subfeeding to volatile and non-volatile compounds. We don't have the results yet, but I just want to show you quickly that definitely, not too surprisingly, based on the picture of in the previous slides, we definitely see a decrease in the wine color intensity with the increased number of lanternfly. Again, it's pretty linear and sharp. And okay, so some key points based on this research part that I cover. What we now tell the growers, right, is that the lanternfly is an additional stress or stressor the vines have to deal with. And definitely, if the vine is healthy, has a higher chance to overcome this additional stress than compared to unhealthy vines or young vines, which are more susceptible to lanternfly feeding, and there where we see more damage and more death. Of course, it's very important to develop an action plan, scouting, starting there around your vineyard, and then, also your vineyard later on. And definitely it's very, very important to reduce feeding timing by adults, because this is what is causing the major problems. We didn't see so far any damage caused by nymphs. Also I mentioned, about grower doing this perimeter spray, versus the full vineyard spray. And I want to mention that because here I have this photo on your right showing a vineyard in Southeast PA. This was 2023, where they had high population of lanternfly in the previous years. So in this specific case, the grower, what was doing was just spraying the edge, the perimeter of the vineyard. And basically the lanternfly were entering from these trees up here and infesting the edge of the vineyard. But the problem is that what happened is that the lanternfly then moved more, deeper inside the vineyard. And if you can see these growth tubes here, those are, vine that died and they have large number of lanternflies. And this is not just these 2 rows, but basically applies to the whole vineyard block. You see this, strip of missing vines, and this is where, most of the lanternfly were feeding. So, edge spray is important, but also you need to be careful to go deep enough and cover the whole area infested with lanternflies. Just, to remark that can be challenging to control lanternfly and also do a perimeter spraying. So just last few notes. I know another concern of our growers, was or is if the lanternfly can act as a vector of pathogen, important pathogen for grapevine. So we did also started some pathogen transmission assay to assess if lanternfly is able to transmit this pathogen. So right now we have looked at the red blotch virus, and we only did 1 year trial so far. And based on 1 year, or this one season, we didn't find any evidence that the lanternfly is able to transmit this virus. Different story for a phytoplasma that is present here in Virginia, in South PA, which is the grapevine yellows. We did find that lanternfly was able to transmit this phytoplasma. We say it's a low transmission rate because only 1 out of 16 vines were became infected after nymphs and adult lanternfly were feeding on them. And we are now looking at the bacteria, the Xylella fastidiosa, which is the causal agent of Pierce disease, because I know that is another big concern, if the lanternfly can act as a vector of this pathogen, very important pathogen. I don't know if I have a few minutes left, but I want to mention that as the lanternfly is spreading, definitely there is a big concern from our grape growers up in Erie, up here. Okay, this area between PA and New York, we have about over 30,000 acres of grapes growing there. Mostly are native grapes, Concord grapes, but it's the biggest grape producing area east of the Rocky. Lanternfly is moving, is getting there. Unfortunately, we have a few reports of lanternfly up in Erie, not in vineyard yet. But definitely there is a huge concern because we found that lanternfly can reduce sugar in the grapes at harvest, if it's not promptly managed. So definitely for Concord producer, that is a big problem or could be a big problem since, that is an important harvest parameter, right? The Brix level of harvest. Also, lanternfly, they can get stuck in between cluster, right? When you kill them with insecticide, they could get stuck within the cluster. So when you do a mechanical harvest, what we have seen, they can get, stuck in there and be mixed with the harvested grapes. So that is another concern. Again, not related to feeding, sub-feeding from this insect, but just the presence of dead or alive lanternfly in harvested grapes, especially, also when you have to sell your grapes or bring your grapes to a co-op. Just, to mention some of the raising concern that we hear from grape growers in other regions. And I have a couple of more slides, just a few other pictures showing you how honeydew and sooty mold can look like on our grapes. So I mentioned before that, as the lanternfly are feeding on the stem here, they release this sticky substance, which is called honeydew. It's mostly like sugar, right? And then this can be colonized by some fungi called sooty mold, which have this kind of black color. So there was a concern, that blackening of the leaves can act as a barrier, for photosynthesis. So indirectly harm the vines, because the sooty mold doesn't per se harm the vine, right? There is no problem with that. But I have to say that we didn't see much sooty mold accumulating on grapevines, on the leaves of the grapevines. We don't know if that is because we apply lots of fungicide, that take care of the problem, but this has not been a concern to our grape grower, sooty mold production on the leaves. We do see honeydew and sooty mold also building up on fruit, right? When we have very high number of lanternfly. Again, this has not been a problem so far for wine grapes. We don't see lots of that. Might can happen. As you can see, probably this is Chardonnay harvest. You can see some black spot in this cluster, and definitely could be a concern for table grapes, right? Because that could be a potential, rejection of grapes with this sooty mold formation on the berries. And really last, I want to mention that in addition to be, a problem for the grapes, for the vineyard, it's also been a problem for winery in general, winery especially that have outdoor tasting rooms, because lanternfly, you really, again, like jump on you, and they lay on the food, on the wine. So winery owners, they've received complaints, right? Verbal complaints, written complaints of lanternfly being present on these outdoor spaces while, they were there visiting the winery. But also on a positive note, people get used to that, because in an area where you have a lot of lanternfly, they're going to be everywhere. They're going to be in your backyard and the parking lot. So people, as you can see here, I wrote at the end, for the most part, they've learned to accept them. Again, to end on a positive note. So with that, I am done, and I just want to acknowledge all the people here at Penn State have been, great help. This is really a team effort, because it's not easy to deal and to work with a pest which is under quarantine, and then definitely all our grower cooperators. We have definitely learned a lot from them and by working with them. So with this, oops, no, I don't have. I want to thank you. And here we have our nice friend eating a lanternfly. And there is also my email address in case you want to email me if you have questions.
Well, that's a great reason to put owl boxes in vineyards, if I do say so.
Yes.
Thank you,
nice
Michela.
too.
So we'll all do a virtual round of applause. That was a fantastic talk, even though a little concerning when you start watching the videos. I'm not gonna lie. So we do have some questions in the chat box. And if possible, I'd like you to keep your slides up, because you may want to go back to them to reference them. But a couple of folks have asked a question on products available to treat for those that are managing organically. And of course, you had a good product list, and JMS Stylet Oil was on that list, which does have an OMRI or organic label. But have you guys looked at other organically labeled products for the control of adult spotted lanternfly? And if so, how have they fared?
Yes, that is a great question. So I'll start by saying we don't have much, organic grape growers in Pennsylvania, very, very few. So most of our work has been done, the work of the entomology is on insecticide, right? Some people have tried insecticidal soaps, but they don't really work very well. They're mixed results. They're not. So bottom line, there is no really good option right now for organic growers. We have tried, and I had actually had a slide here. This is not really chemical control or whatever. These are exclusion netting, which are only feasible or usable if you have a small vineyard. But basically, we have put this, fine mesh netting. Instead of a bird netting, we put this net all around the vines, starting mid-August, when we start to see lanternfly, to exclude lanternfly from feeding on the vines. So it's been working very well, but it's a lot of labor, right? And a lot of netting. So it's not really a viable or feasible option if you have a large size vineyard. But unfortunately, I know it's a big concern, for organic grape producer. And we have organic producers that are worried to lose their license, right? As they have to, if they have to deal with this insect.
And that actually answered a second question. So Paul, hopefully that I'm going to mark your question as answered, because I believe you asked about the netting. So excellent. I do remember seeing that at Jesco too, Michela, and going, oh, it's a lot of work. All right. So the next question relates to your research trial where you were doing the different feeding assays, kind of determining that threshold. And the question I think is a clarification question of, were the vines fed on by the insect SLF for 28 days and then starch measured a year later? Or what was that timeline, the difference between when feeding happened and when starch was measured in the plant?
good question. Yeah. So first I want to mention that the total time was 20, 28 days, whatever, but we did in cycles. Okay. What we did, we tried to reproduce what growers were experiencing. So we let the lanternfly feed on the vines for like 5 days. And then we removed them, all of them by hand. That was no fun. And then after a few days, we reintroduced more lanternfly. So we did like 4 cycles of, and total number will be 28 days. Then in a leaf fall, so in November, we measured the starch. So it was just, shortly after, so it was the same year and was, shortly after, let's say we removed the lanternfly in October, and 1 month later, we measured the starch in the roots. Yeah, now actually we are measuring again after 2 years. I don't have the results yet, but that is one season of infestation in the fall.
Right, so that's a pretty immediate starch impact then on the plant.
Yes, we were, yeah. And it's happening, basically happens every year. I mean, every study we have done, we have seen that effect. So it's pretty consistent.
Perfect. The next question relates to what some of us that don't have spotted lanternfly yet, but some of the activities our local departments of ag are talking about or encouraging. And it's the idea of removing alternative hosts in the area. And this is specifically related to Tree of Heaven. And so have you guys seen a benefit for managing or doing something with Tree of Heaven surrounding the vineyards? And then that in the context of an area like us where we don't have as many riparian areas, and Tree of Heaven might be the only tree in a particular stand.
Yes, that's a great question. We talk about that a lot, and we have different viewpoints. I would say that most of growers, they don't remove Tree of Heaven at this point because there are so many, and also they use them as a trap tree sometimes. They use for scouting to see, and they use as a trap tree, so they basically inject insecticide or spray insecticide or inject the Tree of Heaven. So if the lanternfly go there, they die basically. So there are some growers that have tried to remove Tree of Heaven, but it was not really an effective strategy. Plus they can also be on other trees, and they will enter the vineyard using like maple trees or other type of trees. So at the beginning we were like, yeah, remove Tree of Heaven. But in our case, maybe, it's different because you don't have, lanternfly. Hopefully, your population, if you ever have lanternfly, will be always low. But in our case, removing the Tree of Heaven really was not effective, and growers now prefer to use them as scouting trees or trap trees.
Perfect. And just to do a plug, so I know we have some WSDA invasive species folks on the chat today. They for the Washington State growers and Washington State residents, they are actually trying to identify, the WSDA is trying to identify where we have stands of Tree of Heaven. It is an invasive tree here in Washington, but given the majority of where our grapes are grown in our bigger agricultural, especially the crop agricultural sections, these stands are much smaller, right? Because we don't have a lot of water, so that helps, right? So if you do see Tree of Heaven or around in your area, please visit the WSDA. If you Google search WSDA Tree of Heaven, there's areas to report that, to kind of keep track of whether that's a means to manage Tree of Heaven or a means to better scout for future infestations, right? That would be a good place to start looking. That would be helpful for the WSDA if folks can participate in that citizen science. And then the last question we have, which folks, please feel free to continue to type questions in the Q&A if you have them, is the question related to birds and very similar to your last slide, in the use of birds as a potential combination in cultural management. And just curious whether birds find the spotted lanternfly appetizing, or if it's more like just it moves so I kill it, but it's not appetizing. What have you guys seen in terms of bird feeding?
Yeah, definitely we have seen, birds now, they start to be more interested in lanternfly and they eat them. But also we found that some of them, especially if the lanternfly feeds first on the Tree of Heaven, so they ingest these alkaloids, kind of repellent, substance. So we found that the birds actually spit them out, the hypothesis because, they have alkaloids. And we found other insects like praying mantis and wasps or wheel bugs. They can eat lanternfly, in nymphs or other life stages. So we do see birds or other arthropods that start to eat lanternfly, but not to a level yet, that is effective. But we hope with time, these general predators kind of, will also help to manage the lanternfly population.
Excellent. It's interesting. So for folks who are not aware or unfamiliar, the alkaloids in the tree of heaven make it exceptionally bitter sap, like very, very bitter, unpalatable sap. So it's essentially why an insect might spit that out, or a bird might spit that out. And so we do have a couple more minutes for folks who want to put something into the chat. And I believe we've answered the ones that have already been asked. I'm looking through my information here. So Michela, you and I have experienced a couple of questions on crown gall and excessive phloem feeding and damaging of grapevines. And so for, crown gall is a bacterial infection that often capitalizes when a plant is creating galls during injury sites in plants. Have you guys seen an increase in crown gall in vines that are getting fed on? Do you concern that perhaps the lanternfly may move that pathogen or bacteria with them as they fly? What have you guys experienced?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I didn't mention ground gall. I don't know. For us, it's a big problem in the East Coast, ground gall and winter, related to winter injury as well. We have growers, reporting and showing us pictures of increased ground gall on those vines. Now we don't know if because it's the stress, that cause kind of or this probing, that the lanternfly can actually, with this probing, like spread the bacteria. Or the vines are more stressed and show the symptoms, but we do see more crown gall, and not just on the trunk, but also sometimes on the cordon of the vines. And we see that also a lot in young vines, unfortunately, a lot. I mean, yeah, we have seen that. And now actually we want to do more, I mentioned this transmission assay. We want to expand. It's not easy to do with crown gall, but we want to expand, to other important pathogen for our region.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And the final question here, and you've addressed it a couple of times, and it's a bit limited because, as you indicate, not many growers in Pennsylvania are organic. But the question is, are there any other potential cultural practices a person might approach for organic management of spotted lanternfly?
Unfortunately, I mean, based on our, limited experience with organic production, the only way we try is excluding, the use exclusion netting, which is no, it's only okay for small vineyards, right? And removing the tree of heaven didn't really help much, like avoid the insect from entering the vineyard and feeding on the vines. Or we also try some biological control around the vineyards, like Boveria bassiana, and that also have very mixed results. It's not easy. Didn't really work super well. Yeah. So right now, unfortunately, we don't.
And I think that is a very serious thing to think about when we talk about invasive species, is a lot of the softer chemistries or softer approaches, or organic approaches that we can adopt in production once we know a system, are totally blown out of the water when a brand new invasive pest shows up, right? So that's why it's important to monitor and try to keep pests from invading an area in the first place, because it can really disrupt management practices that we're used to, or that we have developed to help optimize ecological and economic gain on a vineyard.
Yes.
And then the final question, and I'm guessing the answer is no because it's too new in the system, is are there any types of pheromone or lure trapping being studied right now, like there is for berry moth and mealybug?
Being studied, yes. I mean, they're looking at everything, but no results yet. Yeah, unfortunately, yeah.
That's usually the problem with the new bugs, right?
With the new bugs, it takes time. You don't realize until you have to deal with that, right? Plus, with one generation per year is good, but also, you have one chance, you have a limited time during the season to work with that in the natural environment, when we do trials on vineyards, right? Yeah.
I think the other challenge to think about too, from a research perspective, is often when you're dealing with invasive or quarantine pests, by law, you don't get to play around with things. You have to kill the pest first, right? That's the first approach, is eliminate first. And then once, if it unfortunately gets established, then the scientific freedom is there to work on management tactics, right?
Yes.
I think you guys are still in the quarantine quarantine folks or quarantine stage, and hopefully something happens. Maybe, unfortunately for you guys, maybe a cold snap happens and that would be sad, but maybe it kills them all. I know that's not the case. That's not the case. These things are definitely cold hardy.
They are cold hardy. Yes. Neither the polar vortex killed them. Yeah. But yeah.
Right. Kill the plants, but not the pest, right? Unfortunately. Yeah. So if we don't have any other questions, I want to absolutely thank Michela for joining us today. It's been fantastic as always, Michela.
No, thank you. I mean, I didn't want to scare you, so hopefully I didn't scare you, but it's been definitely a concerning pest for us. Yes.
Right. Next time we'll host this webinar on Halloween, so it's a little more theme appropriate.
We have some Halloween costume, Lanternfly
do the whole thing.
Halloween costume.
And Melissa, thank you again.
Thank you, everyone. And now go into the chat and put in the code words, your name, and your pesticide license number. And I'm going to leave this up quite a while